Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this premiere and for this performance. My name is Emmanuel Kaghondi. Um, there's something to do with these two names. Both are my names, although on the written uh, formal way, Kaghondi is looked at as my last name, but actually Kaghondi is my first name. So my name is Kaghondi, which is my cultural name, and Emmanuel is my first name as a Christian name in that case. So both are my names. You can call me Kaghondi or Emmanuel. And with those hybridity in the names comes my musical journey. I come from indigenous musical background from Tanzania. I grew up in central Tanzania, East Africa, and I participated in all traditional music in my culture for many years and transitioned to informal learning, um, especially modern instruments before I was later introduced to the Western or classical music tradition, which for us is in the formal or college programs. So that is my background. But in general, I am a music educator. I compose. My profession is music education. I just finished my doctorate last year. I love composing. I love music technology. Those are my areas of interest. I love ethnomusicology simply because with dealing with African music, you are dealing with not only sound but also life behind those sounds. Um, so with my composition, I welcome you to listen to this piece. And it's an open-ended piece. But in general, in my process, in my composition process, although I have all classical Western composition techniques, I not necessarily begin with those rules and techniques, but I simply respond to what I feel I want to write down. So really, if you look at my scratchbook, it's just something like neumes, something to remind me where I am going with what I am listening to myself. So there might be some unexpected things happening within my compositions, and that is really part of it. And it's a negotiation that I have to make all the time as I compose. Um, for me, composing is a dialogue. And I've been fascinated by the hybridization technique where I have this tradition, two traditions come together, the African tradition and the Western tradition come together. And for me, it's a marriage between sonic traditions. I look at my composition as a dialogue between indigenous tunes and Western instruments. Traditionally, these two traditions have been denied access to each other, I should say, whether due to colonialism or modern knowledge system. So if you go deep down, African sonic devices do not know how to engage in a musical conversation with the Western sonic devices and vice versa. Um, that's why it's probably unlikely to find marimba instrument from East Africa playing in the orchestra or find the orchestral instrument play the African music. So for me, every time I compose something for the Western instruments, I bring that tension together. I want to bring that dialogue where there's a negotiation between what can the Western instrument do to the African tune, or what can the African tune respond to the Western instrument. So it's I love that tension. I love that dialogue, because really I think the challenge for for our multicultural musical education approach is how do we decentralize the status quo, the centralized dominant tradition, and put all music tradition together, where not just walk side by side, but work interactively, work together, and talk, try to talk the same language, even though there might be some accent on how they engage on that conversation. But how do we have those accents? I mean, as in language, you have, how do we communicate with our varieties of, you know, diversity within the same shared musical language? So somehow that is the way I look at my composition, as a dialogue, as a conversation between traditions, and as a negotiation, as a compromise that we all are invited to engage on. So I invite you again, and I want to bring you into contact with this unexpectedness and sometimes suspense. And I hope you all embrace those differences, because with the hybridization, which is, we can take it from political to anthropological to whatever point of view, really the beauty is the difference, the unfamiliarity becomes something of value. And in the music context, it's something that should be worth monetary exchange. Yeah, that's why we can invite you to listen to something like this. So the unfamiliarity, the uncertainty, but at the same time, I don't want you to feel so removed from the music, because I want to have you feel the homeness of some tunes that might sound familiar to you. So that is the aesthetics within that process, and as well as the performance itself. For those who don't know much about the African music, we really, in the African music, the language, we don't have the music, the word music in the African language. What is considered music in the Western world is more, because like the Western definition of music is more into sound than something else. But in the African language, music is the embedded practice. So you will hear some movements and some dance within the tune, and that is part of our music. So again, thank you. I hope you find some goodness and some minimal joyful moments in this nightmare. Welcome.